So DDP is the new undisputed middleweight champion of the world, and in true MMA fan fashion, we always want to move right into what's next. So I really see three potential matchups that lay before him. One is the rematch with Sean Strickland. That was such a razor-close fight, split decision loss, that it feels like Sean is the most deserving. I would put him on the top of the list as far as who deserves the next shot goes. Now, for marketability, I would put Izzy at the top because of the built-in storyline about the real African champion and whatnot. And then Khamzat Chimaev always finds a way to throw his name into the mix, and he did just that last night on Twitter, saying, "I'll see you soon at UFC 300. I think we all kind of think that Khamzat is championship fight material, but me personally, I would like to see him win a fight against a true 185er that's in the top 5 before he gets in there. But either way, or any way the UFC decides to go with this, I think DDP's next fight is going to be a big one.
Yeah, and I love the UFC for the fact that they don't have the answers immediately following the fight night. Of course, when Daniel Cormier got in the ring, on the octagon, and he asked him, who do you want to fight next? That's the last question you always ask a fighter. Not only champions, but everybody, they get that fight, they get that final question, and 9 out of 10 fighters still to this day, it's 2024, we're 30 years into the UFC being a sport, they know the question's coming, and most people still don't call anybody out. DDP called out Izzy, and I think that's a great fight, and that's a direction they can certainly go. And like you said, as far as story goes, that's as good of a story as the UFC has currently.
Yeah.
I think pay-per-view wise, that would probably do really well. And it would be historical to go down to South Africa for the very first time. Now you've got a champion there. It just makes all the sense. But timeline also plays a factor. And if they don't have anything booked down in South Africa right now, it might be hard for them to just throw something together in the first half of this year. It would probably need to wait until the second half of this year, which makes you look maybe at UFC 300. But then again, if they're really interested in going to South Africa, I don't think they would blow their wad with throwing DDP and Izzy on that stacked UFC 300 card, and then, potentially losing their main event, their premier fight that would take place on the South African card. So you have to sort of consider that. And I think Israel Adesanya is the kind of guy that wants to take this break seriously. And he said 2027. Of course, he was trolling with that. But I think we need to let him, come back on his own terms, come back when he's ready. And I don't want to see him get rushed into things. If it's UFC 300, fine. He would really be the one fighter on the roster that could really bump that card up to the next level.
Yeah.
And I don't think, if you look at the landscape of all the champions, that there's anybody that would do as well as the headline for UFC 300 better than Israel Adesanya. Of course, Conor's not fighting on it, and then you'd have to bring in somebody random that's not even in the testing pool. So basically, of active fighters, Izzy would be the best one, but I don't really see him coming back for that, and I think they are going to kick the can and maybe do that thing in South Africa later, which then points to the other two people you gave examples for, Khamzat Chimaev and Sean Strickland. And if we're going off merit, of course, everybody knows Khamzat Chimaev is a championship caliber fighter. I think him versus DDP would be very interesting. Stylistically, it'd be fun because they both got great wrestling. They're both good on the ground, and they both are explosive, dynamic strikers that like to go out there and blow through gas and blow through all of their fuel just to get the fight over with. So it would be highly exciting. But if you go check the pulse of the MMA community, if you go check the pulse of the people that make the fights and everything, you just know that everybody was impressed with Khamzat Chimaev's career so far, and his 185 fight against Kamaru Usman, while he got his hand raised and was very impressive, and that's a former champion, Kamaru Usman came up on 9 days' notice from 170. And a lot of people say, look, I'm all for Khamzat Chimaev fighting for a title. We know he's going to be a champion at some point, but we need to see him fight a top 5 or a top 3 guy actually at 185, somebody that's been there for a while. Think of Robert Whittaker, some of these, Marvin Vettori. So that leads you right back to Sean Strickland. And in my opinion, that's the rightful guy. Sean Strickland, in my opinion, won that fight last night. I think he won 3 rounds to 2. It was close. I wouldn't be mad if you gave it to DDP. That was a very close, razor-close fight. And Sean Strickland, he looked great in there. I don't think he took too much damage. I don't think DDP took too much damage. I say these guys need another 5 rounds against each other to really solidify who the top guy at 185 is. Because after last night, I don't know skill-wise who the number 1 fighter at 185 is. I think DDP has the belt right now, but as I was watching it live, I thought Sean Strickland won the fight. So I think with the limited characters you have to sit the top of UFC 300's bill, I think you might have to just throw the rematch on top, say that's your main event for UFC 300, and go DDP Sean Strickland again.
Yeah, I would love to see that. And that's a main event UFC 300 fight for sure. And, when you look at who the UFC's big stars are, who are their biggest draws? Obviously, Conor McGregor's number one.
Yeah.
I would put Izzy behind him. You have Islam Makhachev, who's out for Ramadan. He's not an option for 300. Sugar Sean O'Malley's fighting on the card immediately prior to UFC 300, so he's out. Volk and Topuria are fighting next month, so they're out. So when you start to, and John Jones is not coming back. Tom Aspinall is it would be for an interim belt. So do you really want UFC 300's top fight, the main event, to be for an interim title?
No.
All signs are pointing to 185 being the division where if it's not 170, maybe Leon Bilal, but I don't think that while that's a very competitive fight and two highly skilled guys who are very deserving of fighting for a title, that's not UFC 300 main event caliber, at least by what Dana has described UFC 300 is going to be. He's almost shot himself in the foot a little bit here by over-promising. Now he can't under-deliver.
Right.
So he's got to deliver something big. And I think DDP versus Sean would do that. I think DDP versus Izzy would do that. Now the question is, because it's very, very easy to say that Sean could get back in there and beat DDP and get his belt back, and then that fight with Izzy is off, and that fight in South Africa is off. So you're rolling the dice if you put DDP back in there prior to setting up a card in South Africa. And so then it becomes a question of, do you want to ice DDP for 9 months? He's a very exciting fighter. He just won the belt. He said 300 sounds good for him. My pick is going to be the same as yours. I think Sean Strickland deserves his shot at the title again after how close that fight was. Sean Strickland did not have to fight DDP on this short a notice. He just became the champion a couple of months ago, but he showed he was a company guy, and he's like, if you guys want me to fight Dricus because you think it could play into some potential mega fight for 300, I'm down, I'll do it. And so I think Sean deserves his due. He should get the fight against DDP, and it should be the main event for UFC 300.
Yeah, I agree. And Sean Strickland really recently has become one of the top draws in the entire sport. As far as active fighters go, you have to take Conor McGregor out of that list. You got to take Jorge Masvidal off the list, Nate Diaz, and you're kind of left with Israel Adesanya, John Jones, and I think Sean Strickland sits right there.
Yeah.
If you told me today that Sean Strickland was a bigger star than Sean O'Malley, I think I'd believe you.
I think for sure he is.
As if you look at the analytics, if you look at the numbers, he's doing bigger numbers than Sean O'Malley is right now. Now I think Sean is going to continue to grow, and he's young, and he kind of has that it factor. And while they go with completely different aspects of how they like to garner attention and get their fans, Sean Strickland is just raw, authentic, and real, and he really resonates with the UFC crowd and the people that are casuals. They see him, they understand him, they get him, and they want to see him fight. So I think Sean Strickland, even though we just saw this fight happen, is the rightful guy to get the next fight at 185, get the title shot. And even though we saw it and people would be like, oh, this isn't a big surprise, like I thought you were going to really blow our hair back with something, this would be a mega fight. I really do think that the crowd would like to see these guys go back. If you go back and look at any comment section after last night's fight, everybody's saying Sean won or instant rematch because it was too close. So I think the world does want to see a rematch. I think timeline-wise, it makes sense to go Sean and DDP again. And I think Israel Adesanya is best to just stay outside, let these two kind of finish, let all the dust settle, and then set up a major card that's probably going to take place in South Africa. And, if Sean is able to go in there and beat DDP, then I think you could potentially still make a successful card take place in South Africa.
Yes.
You get DDP and Hamzat Chimaev down there for a number one contenders matchup.
Or if it's super close, you have a great trilogy at 185, and this is sort of the new rivalry that's emerging at middleweight. If Sean comes back and wins a razor-close split decision against DDP, then they'll probably run that back, and that could be your South African card. The champion who just lost his belt is going to try to regain it on his home soil. So the storyline works there. DDP is only 29 years old, and he's going to be around for a while.